Okay, this is an interview with Ashley Goldsworthy at Kangaroo Point, Brisbane on the 24th of January 2024. Ashley, thank you very much for joining us.
No worries, Paul.
Former president, former CEO, one of the longest standing members of ACS. In fact, I think you'd be fair to say you are the longest standing member of
Amongst
ACS.
them, if they're still alive.
Right, yes. So let's kick off with your own career. So you started with the PMG as an accountant, is that correct?
No, well, actually, no. I was in a group called O&M, which was a British term for organisation methods, and we were responsible for improving systems and procedures.
Right.
And in that role, I got involved in punch card equipment and worked on a process for non-official postmasters.
Right.
And on punch cards. So I went to Lidcombe to do a 6-week course on, what was it, a 600, whatever it was. I can't remember what the punch card system was. But you had all the plug boards.
Yeah.
Okay, which was all very exciting. And then when the government first advertised for people as computer programmers in 1960 or thereabouts, I applied amongst 500 others, and we went through a turgid selection process. They narrowed it down to about a dozen, and then they put us through a further selection process, doing all sorts of psych tests and God knows what else, and it ended up with 4 of us from Brisbane, myself and 3 others, and we went down to do the pitch year, programming training year. They were all class 3s, the old class system. I was already a 6, so
Right.
I went down and did the training, but didn't have to do the exams. So I came back in charge of the Brisbane operation of the Bureau of Statistics, Census and Statistics was in those days, and they were control data.
Yep.
And we installed control data 3200s in the States, and we were a central bureau. We did bureau processing for a number of Commonwealth departments and also state government.
Yep.
So it was all very exciting times. Before I went on the PIT course, I did the first programming course at the University of Queensland.
Right.
On their GE 225. And we programmed in machine language, which was valuable because it got you inside the machine. I mean, they had a total storage of about 8K,
Right.
which is absolutely minus zero in today's technology.
Yep.
But it was interesting to do that, and then we got a gap and assembler. And then eventually they got Fortran and COBOL and so on. But it was interesting because you're really in the guts of it, programming in zeros and ones.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's very good to train logical thinking. Anyway, so that was the introduction. Then I ran the bureau up here for a few years, and. So it went. Then I was asked to go to Canberra to a very senior position as Director of Economic Statistics, and my wife didn't like Canberra, so I said, "Okay, love, we won't stay." So I came back.
Right.
And SGIO, the State Government Insurance Office, were in a hell of a mess computer-wise. They were 6 months behind in issuing renewal notices. Now, if they'd been a private insurance company, they would have been bankrupt.
Right.
But because they were government, they weren't. But they were in dire needs, which opened up an opportunity for me. And I was offered a role to run their IT operations and sort it out, which I did for a number of years. And we were we introduced some very advanced systems in those days. We had the first. We call them VDUs in the old days, Visual Display Units.
Yep. And
we created an online system, which was very advanced for those days. When I joined the organisation, I mean, you'll be able to edit this, won't you?
Oh, absolutely.
When I joined the organisation, I said to the troops, they had a group of about 120 people in IT, I suppose. We called it ADP in those days.
Right.
They called it information processing.
Yep.
And I said, well, what are you doing? They said, well, we're organising this U-Butte one system. It was a multi-insurance company, so it had every form of insurance known to man, including workers' compensation. And they said, so we go and give people a unique identifier, 15 digits. When they come in, they just enter that, that'll bring all their policies together.
Right.
I said, oh, gee, that's pretty clever, isn't it? They said, yeah, we think it is. I think it's an absolute bloody waste of time.
Right.
I said, we already have a unique identifier. It's called our name. Oh, they said, we thought about that, but there's so many problems with variations and, you know, the same name. As I said, you just filter it down. Okay, so there's a few Ashley Goldsworthys.
Yep.
How many Ashley William Goldsworthys are there? How many Ashley William Goldsworthys were born on the 2nd of November 235? I said, we're getting pretty narrow now, aren't we?
Yep.
So I said, throw out all the work you've done.
Right.
And start again. Now, when I went to America, and so we did that. So you came in and said, my name is Ashley Goldsworthy. Bingo, all your policies. I went to America a few years later and was talking to all the big American companies about this, and they were absolutely amazed. They still had the old system of where you gave them your name, they looked up a card system and got their 15 digits, put it in.
Right. Yep.
Etc., etc. I also introduced the first key to disk system. I had the two people who provide a small two-person company. They were doing the spot welding on the floor on the cards.
Yep.
To create the key to disk system. We're also the first organisation to introduce microfilming.
Okay. Right.
Microfiche.
Yep.
As they called it.
Yep.
For all the policies, and that saved enormous storage costs.
I can well imagine.
Because we had to keep all the policies, was all hard copy, and all the correspondence, and so that was an innovation. And the two fellows that started it with me on my staff, they saw the benefits of it, so they came to me one day and said, Ashley, we're going to resign. Is that you, Christine?
Yeah.
Can you stop this?
Yep, no problem. Yep.
Paul has arrived. They came to me one day and said, Ashley, we can see the potential of this microfiche business if you set up. We want to resign and set up our own commercially. Right. I said, fellas, they were two of my brightest staff. I said, go your hardest. And they very successfully set up a business here in New South Wales and in New Guinea.
Yep. Microfiche
business. They're both deceased now, but anyway. So it was very exciting times in those days.
Yep.
A lot of the excitement has gone because a lot of the skill needed has disappeared.
Sure.
You don't need any skills to operate a micro or a mobile or a... You don't have to worry about storage and all that sort of stuff. And the first to demonstrate, I suppose, when I joined SGI, they had just accepted ICL equipment, and the chairman asked me before I joined them if I would come down and do acceptance testing from the bureau, which I did.
Yep.
As a favour, and then I joined him a few weeks later, and the first thing I said to him was, that gear is completely inadequate.
Right.
He said, we've just paid $2 million. I mean, this is back in the 1970s. We've just paid, extra $2 million, I think it was, for it. He said, we've just got it. I said, well, I'm sorry, but it's completely and utterly, there you go, handmade by Christine.
Oh, thank you.
The cake is, the biscuits.
Thanks a lot.
And to give him his due, because he just paid a lot of money to recruit me, he said, okay, well, write me a spec that you think we need. So I went home at the weekend and sat down at a table and wrote a 2-page spec. Now, we were part of the public service, so we were under the control of the Public Service Board, and they had all their IT experts.
Right.
So I submitted, and they came down to me and said, you can't be serious. They said, Main Roads have just done a specification, and they've got 3 volumes.
Right.
I said, you've submitted 2 pages. what about all the, how much memory you want and how much this and what speed you want, etc. I said, I'm not interested. I said, I'll do a test deck and get the supplier to run it. I'll have a look at his outcome and see if it's right.
Yeah.
And what it costs. I said, I don't give a bugger how many cylinders the car has got.
Yeah.
I don't give a damn what size they are. I just want them to perform. They said, okay. So they said, okay, we'll run with your 2-page spec, which they did. And IBM, Dr. Frank Bar David, well-known IBM managing director in Sydney,
Yep.
Came up to see the treasurer then, Sir Lou Edwards, and said,
Right.
you've got a big problem with the SGIO. This Goldsworthy doesn't know what he's talking about. He said, they want us to run this test deck. He said, we don't do that.
Right.
We specify the equipment you need and we give you all the support you need. It's called the IBM umbrella.
Yep.
To give the treasurer his due, he said, well, we've just paid a lot of money to get this fella. He said, I'm sorry, but you'll have to stick with it. So Frank came to see me and said, well, Ashley, we don't do this. I said, well, Frank, I know you've been to the treasurer because he's spoken to me.
Yep.
I said, you do it or you're not in. He said, well, how long have we got? I said, you've got 2 weeks. He said, we need a month.
Right.
I said, okay, Frank, you've got 2 weeks. So they came to the party.
Yep.
I flew over to the States. We run the test deck. Control data killed them.
Right.
Absolutely killed them.
Yep.
So I came back and built control data,
Right.
as we had in the Bureau.
Yep.
It was beautiful equipment. Beautiful equipment.
Yep.
They had a 3600 in Canberra. But anyway, so they were the early days.
Yep.
We went on from there. Then I moved into CEO roles from then on.
Right. And which organisations were those with?
Oh, subsequent to SGIO, you'd have to get them out of my book.
Right. Okay.
The main one, well, I guess after I left, just the main ones, after I left SGIO, where did I go next? Then I think, stop it for a minute.
No problem.
Oh, well, of course, then I went to Suncorp. Well, we've talked about Suncorp though, haven't we?
No, we haven't.
Oh, we haven't. Well, that's where I was just, SGIO
Yeah.
was the predecessor who became Suncorp,
That's
so
right.
I've just spoken about it.
Yep.
And I was with them until from 79 to 87, and then I was I then played a major role in setting up the building society. We'll come back to that later. 7 building societies failed in Queensland, and the Treasurer decided to set up an SGIO building society. I was
Right.
with SGIO bracket insurance.
Yeah.
And then I got a phone call one day from... So, I got visited one day when I was at SGIO by 2 board members from the Building Society. And they said, we would like you to come on board as CEO of the Building Society, which meant I would have to resign from the Queensland Public Service and join them.
Right.
But their chairman was the chairman that I'd worked with for 7 years at the SGIO, and he was an absolute difficult man to work
Right.
for.
Yes.
The first week I started at SGIO, he called me up, and I'd just been first week to sort out the computer problems, and he called me up, and I'd written a couple of letters for his signature, and he diced me and sliced me.
Yep.
So I sat there and I listened to him. I said, oh, yes, Mr. Riding. Yes, Mr. Riding. No, Mr. Riding. And I went home and said to my wife, I said, I'm resigning.
Right.
She said, but you've only been there 5 days. I said, I know that, love, but I don't take that from anybody. So I resigned. So we've got 4 kids. We've got no money. What are you going to do? I said, don't worry. Have faith. So I went in on Monday and I dropped a resignation on his table. And he said, we better talk about this. He said, what brought this on? So I said, the way you spoke to me Friday. So we had a long conversation. And we agreed that I could run IT. He ran the company. He was the boss. There's no doubt about that.
Sure.
I said, but never ever try to tell me how to run IT. Never ever speak to me like that again. Then I had a flash of genius. I don't have many. And I said to him, Eric, as I'm now going to work with you, you can call me Ashley and I'll call you Eric. Now, you don't know the significance of that, but everybody in the organisation, including his deputy of 20 years, who was about 20 years older than me, everybody called him Mr. Writing.
Right.
And his jaw dropped as I walked out, and he and I were like that.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Ever since. And anyway, when the Treasurer decided to rescue these societies, Eric called me one day and said, 5 o'clock, come up to the office. I went up, it was full of eminent Brisbane business people, men. They were all chairmen of the failed societies, and Eric said the Treasurer this afternoon announced in the House that we're setting up a building society called the SGI Building Society. I said, okay. He said, I want you to set it up and run it. I said, wait a minute. I said, I know absolutely nothing about banking. Nothing. He said, no, but you're the only person I've got that can do this.
Right.
He said, these gentlemen here, the chairman of the building, they're here to help. In my youthful exuberance, I said, thank you, but I don't need the help. I'll do it. What resources do I have? He said, none, only what you've got.
Right.
My existing IT staff. Anyway, I said, how long have I got? He said, a fortnight. So we said, we put into place procedures, policies, and opened 6 branches a fortnight later.
Okay, right.
And I set up the systems and got it working, and Eric went over as chairman of the Building Society. Yeah. And 2 years later, when 2 of his board members came to see me and offered me the job as CEO, I said, you've got to be joking. I said, I worked with him for 7 years, you know what he's like. He said, yeah, he's gone through 6 CEOs in 2 years.
Right.
You're the only person we know that can handle him. I said, okay, it's going to cost you dearly. I said, okay. I said, does he know you're here? I said, no, he doesn't. I said, well, once he knows that it's me, I said, he'll just say no. As chairman, he'll say not on. Yep. I said, no, we've got board approval. Yep. So, is this relevant?
No, that's all of this. All of this is part of the history, and that's the whole purpose of this interview.
Okay, so then the so I said I wanted paper before I resigned from here. So we did a very good deal, double what I was earning, and so I turned up, went down the first morning, walked through the door, and said, "Eric, we're back together." He said,
"Right."
First week, he came across a decision that I'd made, a major decision. That I'd approved ashtrays for the branches, and he overruled it. He said, they don't need ashtrays, they can't have ashtrays. I said, oh Eric, we're not going to go through this again. I said, I'm going to resign again after a week.
Right.
I said, but I'll wait till the board meeting to do it. So I waited for the board meeting. A couple of weeks later I went into the board and dropped my resignation on the table, and he was the chairman. And one of the board members was Sir Jack Edgerton. He was a Labor Party man, strong unionist, big burly fellow, and he'd been kicked out of the Labor Party when he accepted the knighthood from Malcolm Fraser.
Oh, right.
So he was persona non grata with the Labor Party.
Right.
But he said, what's the reason for this? I said, well, I approved ashtrays for the branches, the 6 of them, and Eric, as chairman, overruled me and said, no ashtrays. Well, Jack had a very deep, resonating voice. He was a very big man. I won't use his words on TV, but he said, Eric, you can't be effing serious. You can't be. You effing serious? And he then turned to me and said, "Ashley, can you leave us?" I said, "Sure," said Jack. I went out, and the board meeting went on for quite a while. They called me back in about 5 o'clock and they said, "We've resolved the problem. You're staying and the chairman's going."
Right, okay. So, solved the problem. Yeah.
And I've had several of those sort of issues elsewhere. So then, then I ran that for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, I think. And we became the #1 society in Queensland and the #2 in Australia.
Yep.
For those 7 years I was CEO, we grew at 3 times the rate of the rest of the industry every year. Because I introduced a policy of an innovation every month.
Okay. Yep.
Product, process, whatever. And we did that.
Right.
We did that. Some of them were leading edge. For example, we introduced the 14-day loan, which we told people, because most people were paid fortnightly.
Yeah.
And I said, well, look, halve your payments and pay them fortnightly, because they paid monthly.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
So halve your payments, pay them fortnightly,
yep.
And the difference it will make to the length of your loan is enormous. It cuts years off.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And the banks wouldn't allow that.
Okay, right.
Banks would not allow that. You couldn't go in and pay any more.
Yep.
So we did that, and it was just, I mean, it was great. It was great. Innovations like that. We're the first to introduce ATMs.
Yep.
In those days. And Eric had done the previous chairman. One of the things when I joined, he gave me a pile of files and said, "We've done a lot of research on these new machines that serve you cash." He said, and the result of the research is they're not economically justifiable.
Right.
So he said, "You take the files." He said, "You can take the files and read them for interest if you like." But I made the decision. I said, "Okay." So I took them home and read them, and I came in the next day and with the files, and he said, "Oh, did you read those files?" I said, "Yes, Eric, I'll just throw them in the WPB."
Right.
He said, "Why?" I said, "Because the argument is nonsense." I said, I'll ask you a simple question. Economically justify lifeboats on a boat."
Yep.
I'm waiting for your answer, Eric. How do you economically justify spending all that money on those little boats that go just sit there?
Yeah.
You can't, can you? I said, ATMs are the lifeboats of the banking industry.
Okay, yep.
So I've ordered 6.
Right. And those are the first in Australia. Now that's an interesting thing you've raised there about innovation and technology. I mean, that was such a change for the banking industry at the time. What are your experiences with innovation and implementing those into big organisations that are obviously got resistance?
Be ready for the time they run out of steam.
Right.
As you'll see now that banks are removing ATMs.
That's right.
Because there's a new technology supplanting them.
Yep.
And that's one of the dangers when you get the technology in, that you don't monitor when it's had it.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, that life cycle of technologies.
I mean, these days, everybody has got at least one.
That's right. Yep, I've got 2 here.
And you do your banking on it.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah, we were one of the first people who introduced a bill paying system for our clients. So they could tell us their bills and we'd pay them for them. That was innovative. I mean, these days that sounds like, Noah building the ark. Sure. Don't forget, Noah was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
So you've got to keep your eye on the lifetime of the technology.
Right.
But anyway, so then I got a phone call one day when I was in the chair from the chairman, Sir Roderick Proctor, who replaced Eric after they moved him on. And Rod was a great person, an accountant. And he rang me one day as I was in the car driving back from Caboolture. And he said, "Ashley, how would you like to go to Melbourne?" And I said, "Yeah, why would I want to go to Melbourne?" He said, "Well, I'd like to talk to you." So he was the chairman of Jennings Group, which was the largest construction company, not just house builder.
Yep.
They built the first 3 casinos.
Right.
two in Tasmania and Jupiter's here in Queensland.
Yep.
And he said, so he had to talk to me. He said, look, I'd like to offer you, he was chairman of Jennings, I'd like to offer the job of CEO of the Jennings Group. I said, well, gee, Rod, I really don't know too much about construction or building. He said, you're not there as the chief builder. He said, you're there as the CEO. And I said, okay. So I talked about my wife to it. I said, big change, love. But anyway, so I accepted the job for 3 years. I said, I'll give you 3 years in Melbourne. So we went down. And before I went down, the then CEO, who'd been with the company for all his life, an engineer, Jim, rang me and said, the senior executives would like to meet with you, Ashley, before you actually take up duty. I said, oh, okay, why is that? He said they want to see if if everything clicks. I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. I said, yeah, okay, I'll come down and see if they're happy with everything. So I went down and we had a lovely lunch, and the managing director of the construction division, they were all large businesses in themselves, commercial, housing, etc., etc. He said, we've had a look at your CV. I said, that's very wise. He said, you're a statistician, insurance, accounting, computing. He said, you know absolutely nothing about construction. I said, that's right. Don't know one end of a brick from another.
Right.
He said, so how can you think you go run Australia's largest construction company? I said, what do you think the CEO's role is? I said, I thought you as managing director of construction group were responsible for building casinos and the hotels and all the rest of it. I said, that's not my role. I said, my role is to allocate resources amongst all you people.
Yep.
Now, whoever gives me the best ROI will get the funds. And if you don't deliver the best ROI, I'll close you down.
Sure.
Now, does that clarify my role? I said, when I come down, I'll clarify yours.
Yep.
So I joined the company, and in 3 years turned it around completely.
Right. So, going on to ACS and its founding. So, in the meantime...
coming back, 1960.
Right. Yep.
The Queensland Computer Society.
Right.
We formed. I had SGIO, which was the biggest computer centre in the Treasury State Treasury had their own computer centre. Main roads had their own computer centre.
Yep.
And we were really the forerunners of computing. So we got together and decided, and there were a few other people who were like the University of Queensland and etc. etc. And we formed the Queensland Computer Society.
Yeah.
And that was, if my memory serves me correctly, 1962.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
And 1962. And then, of course, in 1966, then there were computer societies. I think the first state computer society, if I recall correctly, was South Australia.
That's correct, yeah.
I think they were 1960. And Victoria, then us, then etc. So we all got together and said, well, look, let's form an Australian computer society. And we got together and wrote a constitution, etc., etc. In 1966, kicked off the Australian Computer Society with, I think John was the first president, John Bennett.
How was that with bringing together the disparate state societies? Was there much suspicion between them, or reluctance becoming
suspicion, reluctance, distrust,
right,
and all the rest of it. And in the early days of the society, it was New South Wales versus Victoria.
Right.
And the rest of us just sat on the side.
Watch the fight.
But it was exciting because it was new.
Right.
So we had to put it together, and we had to put together, membership qualifications and policies and practices and, all of that built on what we'd done in the States.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it was, I guess I would describe it as exciting.
Right.
And there was a deep commitment by everybody involved to get this up and running.
Yeah.
And we did that pretty successfully. And some of the things we did in those days they need to repeat, which they've killed in recent years, is the viability of the branches.
Right.
The branches delivered to the members in those days, and the National Management Committee or National Council just spent its time resolving disputes between New South Wales and Victoria,
Right.
and supporting what they were trying to do. But there were lots of workshops and conferences and journal. I mean, I'm jumping around a bit, I know.
Sure.
I'm sorry,
That's
folks,
right.
if you're watching this, I'm sorry. But, you know, one of the big things that we lack today as a journal, there isn't a genuine professional society that doesn't have a professional journal.
Right.
We don't,
Yeah.
because we're not a professional society. We're a pseudo-commercial society that's bought into commercial operations which have nothing to do with a profession. I mean, compare us to the British Computer Society. My God, we're not the same sort of animal.
Sure.
Compare us to the Institution of Engineers. We're not the same sort of animal.
Yeah.
We don't do what they do. We don't provide to the members what they provide, like a professional journal, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We have a lot of wimpy. If you have a look at the ACS website, it's a disgrace.
Yeah.
A lot of wimpy things, including the fact that it claims to have 47,000 members when it doesn't.
Yeah.
It does not have 47,000 members. It has about 9,000 members, and I can produce evidence
Sure. Yeah.
on paper,
Yep.
numbers. But
Yep.
if you press ACS, you see the little, you know, little bright thing turning around, 20, 40, 47,000 members.
Yeah.
It's a complete lie.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll get back to that later.
Good,
on,
right,
about
good.
where the at this stage I'd like to tease out a bit more about the origins of ACS. So what was the driving motivations for bringing together the states?
Because we could see the technology, the potential
Right.
of the technology.
Yep.
I wrote a paper amongst my 140 publications
Yep.
many years ago. I don't think I printed it out. But it was a very early paper in the 70s.
Yep.
And I said it's all about the I, not the T.
Mm.
Okay, I'll send you a list of those if you want.
Yeah. The information, not the technology.
That's right. And that unfortunately was subsumed by the technologists.
Sure.
The profession was driven by the technologists who saw the T as everything.
Right.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I saw it as a mechanism, not an end in itself.
Yeah.
A lot of people saw it as an end in themselves.
Sure.
And because everybody's eyes around the board table glazed over when you mentioned IT, they had a free run.
Yeah.
Because nobody understood it.
Yeah. Right.
Nobody understood it. So they got away with murder.
Right.
I mean, the systems that were put forward, the Commonwealth Government at one stage, when I was with SGIO, asked me to come down and have a look at a system called Manpower
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that they'd spent 90 million on. It was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And to give them an assessment of what it would cost to bring it to fruition.
Right.
So I went down and spent a few days. They said, you'll probably need a few months to really do this properly. I said, no, I won't. So at the end of a few days, I said, don't spend another dollar.
Right.
I said, it's an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
Design-wise. And they said, okay, they closed it down.
Right.
Technologists were driving it.
Sure.
And they could see how many spools they needed and how many...
Yeah. So,
how much capacity they need and what speeds it had to run out and all that sort of bloody stuff. And we've seen it even today. I mean,
absolutely.
18 months ago, the Queensland government, had spent millions on a system out the window.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't do the simple things. I mean, I had a look at this system, the Queensland one. They hadn't done a parallel run.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to be a genius to say, well, the best way to test this system is to run it this week and to see if the payroll comes out as it should.
Sure.
You don't sit down and analyse pages and pages and pages. You just say, okay, let's put the payroll through twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they wonder why they get disasters.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a well-known principle in business, the KISS principle. You know the KISS principle?
Yep.
That's why it's so important.
Mm.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. But reading some of your articles from that period too, jumped out very strongly to me that you were very much focused on the human element of this, the people element behind it.
Yeah, I was chairman of the Social and Economic Implications Committee of the ACS for 17 years.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very important to me.
Mm.
To focus on it, because that's what it's all about.
Sure.
It's not the technology.
Yeah.
It's the use of the technology
Mm-hmm.
and the adaptability in human space.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're now getting around to robots, which thank God I'll be gone before then.
Right.
But too many technologists overlook that.
Sure. Mm.
Still do.
Yeah.
Still do.
Mm.
They don't see the need to design systems.
Mm.
I mean, geez, you go on and on and on, don't I? But one of the things you do when people are designing computer systems is they tend to start from scratch.
Sure.
Or you butte now. We want a payroll system?
Yep.
We'll design one.
Mm.
So we have 750 payroll systems in Australia.
Yeah.
How many do we really need? Probably 3.
Yeah.
Okay. So I used to say, no. Amend the system to support what's there.
Sure.
May not be the most efficient,
Mm.
but let's not start designing the wheel again.
Yeah.
Let's just take the wheel we've got and make it work.
Yeah. Mm. So going back onto the ACS history there. So how did the idea come about of bringing together the state, the various state societies?
Natural.
Mm.
I mean, if you have any organisation in Australia, which is a federation,
yep.
one of the first things you come up with is the idea of a federation.
Mm. Sure.
And I mean, what was the sense in having 6, whatever how many there were, 6 state-based societies in Australia?
Mm.
I mean, you needed to coordinate.
Yeah.
1 plus 1 can make 3.
Mm.
So it was just natural, I guess, for all of us to say, well, let's create the Australian Computer Society.
Sure.
We probably spent 3 weeks determining what the name should be.
Okay. Yeah. Mm.
But no, the people then were keen, committed, professional, energetic, and they did it all voluntary.
Right.
They did it all voluntary.
Yeah.
Which I get whispers these days that volunteers are looking to be remunerated in some way.
Mm.
That's another big mistake.
Right.
Volunteers deliver.
Yeah.
Not only here, but I mean, look at Australia. You've got volunteer firefighters, lifesavers.
Sure.
I mean, Australian society is based on volunteers.
Yeah.
The ACS was based on volunteers.
Right. Yeah. So of those volunteers, who stood out as, along with yourself, as some of the driving forces, some of the individuals that were really driving it?
Oh, gee. I mean, well, the first 3 honorary members that were elected were John Bennett, Peter Merton and myself.
Right.
John was the first president, or was it Trevor Pearson? I think it was John. He was a driving force. He was the first professor of computing in Australia.
Right.
His title was Professor of Physics, bracket, electronic computing,
right.
bracket, in Sydney.
Yep.
John was a driving force. John was the best raconteur I've ever met.
Right.
He was the IFIP representative.
Yep.
So when I became president and went to the first meeting in 1977 or whenever it was to bid for the World Computer Conference, I went with John, and subsequently until I took over as IFIP rep. And John would regale me with anecdotes and stories endlessly. He was a lovely fellow. I liked John very much.
Mm.
And Peter Merton from Victoria
Yep.
was another driving force. I mean, I guess that's why we were the first 3 honorary fellows.
Right.
But there were lots, it's unfair to start mentioning names, but there are lots of people. I mean, one of my old mates up here, Alan Coulter, for example,
Oh, yeah.
was a driving force. He was a major power he worked in PMG with me.
Mm.
Before me. Went to Melbourne as their first computer
Right.
person.
Yep.
He was a Deputy Assistant Director General at a very young age.
Mm.
And he resigned from there to come back to Brisbane because his wife.
Oh, right.
See? And then he took over the Brisbane City Council
Yep.
in charge of their computing.
Yep.
And then he went to the University of Queensland as Director of the Computer Centre. Now, people like Alan Coulter, gee whiz. I could have got a list of names out. Tony Montgomery, Bob Northcote was a very powerful figure from South Australia, Professor Bob Northcote.
Yep.
There are a whole list of people whose, unfortunately, my age and memory can't recall immediately,
Sure.
that were, essential to it. It was a large group of very dedicated people.
Yep. Right.
I can dig up subsequently some names.
I'm happy to hear about it. And so, eventually, you became CEO.
No. That was a long time down the track.
Right.
I became president in
Yep.
74, wasn't it? I tell you what, we elected our first founding fellows in 1969.
Yep.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of that information is not on the web,
That's right.
but a lot of the names are.
Mm.
And those founding fellows were really the people that drove it.
Right.
Elected in 1969, so
Yeah.
started in 66, 69.
Mm-hmm.
We said, okay, these are the people that are really driving
Right.
so they became FACS.
Yep.
And they were the leading lights. And if you they're up on the web.
Yep.
If you have a look at those,
Mm-hmm.
they were really the names that should be highlighted.
Sure.
Should be highlighted.
Yep. Hmm. So, skipping
And
ahead
then-
to...
Then I became president in 1974,
Mm-hmm.
again in 1975, and then again in 1982 and 83.
Yep.
And I remember when I decided, Alan Coulter succeeded me the first time. We were driving around Queen Street one day in a car, and Alan said, you go and nominate again? I said, yes. He said, oh God, you've been there, Ashley, give it away. And there was a fellow, this all sounds sort of building yourself up, but it's not. It's fact. And there was a fellow in Western Australia. They put up the names of the candidates, and he wrote, in fact, I think it might be in my book. Anyway, he wrote a public article and supporting me, and he ended up by saying, why have beer when you can have champagne?
Sure.
His name is on the tip of my tongue, and it doesn't matter.
No, that's all right. When it comes back to you, that's fine.
So that was 74, 75. 77, as I said, one of the first 3 honorary members.
Mm.
But then I served, I don't know how many years as National Vice President. I was National Vice President in 1971, 72, 73, 1980.
Mm. Yeah.
A lot of other things.
Yeah.
People aren't interested in all that.
Mm.
But it became a large part of my life.
Sure.
And I was IFIP representative for 18 years,
Yeah.
which was a fairly long time.
Mm.
And eventually became the first person from the Southern Hemisphere
Yeah.
to be elected to IFIP, which is very Eurocentric.
Yeah.
Very Eurocentric.
Mm.
And that was. I remember the first when I went to Stockholm to bid for the 1980 Congress. We'd lost out on the 1977 one to Canada, and it was my first. And I wasn't a representative; I was just an observer. John was the rep, and I sat there, and it was. I remember one incident. I'll call him West German. Delegate was a very eminent. Most of the IFIP representatives were very eminent professors.
Right.
Like from Austria was Professor Dr. Heinz Zemanek, who spoke 7 languages. Was an IBM fellow, whatever, if you know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And very eminent. Anyway, there was a debate going on in the middle of it. He was a big burly man, long flowing grey hair. Oh, the language at IFIP is English, so you have to speak English.
Right.
So he got up from West Germany, and he went on. How dare my country be referred to as West Germany? It's the German Democratic Republic, and that's what I intend and want to hear here. I don't want to hear any references to a non-existent. And he went on and on.
Okay.
And I said to John, Jesus, is this what it's like all the time? He said, yeah. He said, I'll tell you why that's important. He said, when he goes back to East Germany, he'll be interrogated, and he can prove that he stood up and defended his country in an international forum, and he said he'll be spared.
Yeah.
He said that's why he had to do that. He had no choice.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, so that, I thought that was, and then later on in the IFIP we got a female representative from France, and she came along with an interpreter, and I was president at that stage, and I said, you know you have to speak English. She said, that's why I've got an interpreter. I said, but your English is perfect. I said, we're having this conversation with without the interpreter.
Yeah.
And I said, your English is... I said, but what's the issue? She said, I don't know whether you know the French, the language is controlled by the French Academy.
Yeah.
She said the Academy, when I was elected, because the previous French representative, Jacques Furreau, just spoke English. And she said, when I was elected president, they said, we don't want the French representative at an international forum speaking English.
Right.
They said, so you will speak French and he will interpret it. So I took that for one meeting, and then I called her aside and I said, the rules state you speak English. I said, now I will not let you attend another meeting unless you speak English.
Yeah. Right.
I said, you go back to the French Academy and tell them that's my decision. The interpreter disappeared.
Good stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting, the way I think there's 60 nations in IFIP or something these days.
Yep.
But it's a very useful body.
Yeah. Actually, worth exploring that a bit more. How IFIP came about and ACS is in your role with it.
Oh well, no, IFIP came about before ACS.
Right.
Okay. IFIP, their first meeting was in Paris in 1960.
Right.
Okay, and they decided to form. ACS wasn't formed. In fact, it was ANCAC in Australia, the Australian National Committee on whatever it was, mathematics, whatever. Anyway, ANCAC.
Sure.
And so ACS didn't come along till later and supplanted ANCAC as the representative. So we didn't play any role in the formation of IFIP. But we became a significant player. Well, we've had 3 world conferences here. Yep. 2 of which I chaired, 1980 and 92, and then 2010, of which I was on the program committee.
Right.
The first one was interesting. When we went to Stockholm in 1977, Canada had got 77. Japan had missed out, and we'd missed out.
Yeah.
And the 2 contenders for 1980 were Japan and Australia. Now, IFIP is very political. Very political.
Yeah.
And one thing they didn't want to do was the Japanese to lose face.
Sure.
So we knew this. John was a little bit reluctant to become aggressive, but I spoke to the president of IFIP and I said, there's one thing I can't stand, I can't afford to lose face. I mean, it's foreign to us, we don't worry.
Yeah.
But I wanted them to start thinking about, well, geez, Australia can't lose face. Japanese can't lose face.
Yeah.
So we got together in a huddle, John and myself and the Japanese representative, and we came up with the idea of a joint congress. The first week in Tokyo and the second week in Melbourne.
Right.
So IFIP had given us a year to come up with a proposal.
Yep.
So we went back the next year and put this proposal to them, the joint congress. Well, it was out of the blue. I mean, they never had one before, etc., etc., etc. And anyway, we convinced them we could do it.
Yeah.
And it was a rip-roaring success.
Right.
Rip-roaring success. Dr. Caro Endo was chairman in Tokyo. I was chairman here. And we got, I don't know whatever the numbers are, they're around somewhere, but we got 3,000 or 4,000 to those congresses.
Right.
So Australia played a significant role on working groups and technical committees.
Yeah.
People like Alan Coulter and so on and so forth, and Judy Hammond, for example, names come to me.
Yep.
Who was on the social implication side. Judy played from Sydney.
Yep.
Played a significant role. And Australia was up there with it. We haven't seen an IFIP event in Australia for a long time.
Yeah. So on this topic of Australia's position in the computing industry, how do you see it today, and where do you see it?
What do you define the computing industry?
Well,
that's a non-definable term.
Okay. How would you define it?
I don't.
Right.
If it's non-definable, how can I define it?
Fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, what are we talking about?
Yeah. So, technology sector.
What technologies?
Okay. Yeah. So we've got the emerging technologies, things like AI, which of course is getting all the publicity
which
at the
is
moment.
Computer based.
Yep. Absolutely.
See, that's one of the definitional aspects you've got to attend.
Sure.
What is it based on?
Yep.
Electronics.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know. Where do we stand? Well, we've lost the initial. We developed the third computer in the world.
Yep.
We were a leading force in those days.
Yeah.
We're not now.
Sure.
We're a minor user.
Yeah.
Minor user.
Yeah.
What role do we play in the professional field? I suspect very little. We don't have a professional journal, so we don't have a voice. Where do Australian, if I can use the term, we might come back to it, computer professional?
Yep.
Where do they publish?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They publish in other journals.
Yeah.
It's a disgrace.
Yeah.
That we don't have a vehicle that we can put in front of professionals in Australia, peer reviewed, and say publish.
Yeah.
We've given it away.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely no desire in the current management to retrieve that. There might be some like Carl Reid. There's another name that I should have mentioned.
Sure.
Carl was a driving force.
Yep.
People like him would, but they're few and far between. Roger Clark.
Yep.
Carl Reid. Other people.
Yep.
Bo.
Yep. Right. Yeah. So just hovering on that for a moment, you just mentioned about advocacy and so you did a lot in terms, and behind you this picture of you with Barry Jones there.
And good old Barry.
Yeah, and so you did a lot around advocacy, both on behalf of the industry and ACS. Interested in discussing that.
Barry and I overlapped presidencies. Barry was national president of the Labor Party, overlapping my presidency of the federal president. Significant difference there. Federal as opposed to national. I won't go into politics. And he had a very deep interest in computing. Well, he wrote Sleeper's Wake.
That's right. Yes.
And he and I became quite good friends. And that's probably when I used to invite people to Bond,
right,
to speak, and Barry. But he was very supportive when I wanted to set up the National Information Technology Council, for example.
Right.
Or the National Information Industry Association, which was another two bodies that you would have read about that I
yeah, you did. You sent those across.
But also one of the interesting things. In 1978, I became the founding chairman of the NITC, the National Information, which I set up. I was chairman for 14 years.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I did with that organisation, it was volunteer based. We had groups in every state, and in 1979, 81, 82 and 83, we ran information technology weeks.
Right.
Because in the 1980s there was a great depth of ignorance in the community about computing and what it could do and what it couldn't do.
Yeah.
So we ran these information technology weeks, all volunteers.
Yeah.
Organisations like IBM put on displays and people came in to see what these newfangled devices could do, etc., etc. They were very important. It became an information technology month.
Right.
Subsequently.
Yeah.
Which only lasted for 1 year because the Fed said everybody knows it now, so we don't need to fund these anymore.
Yeah.
But what I did was I edited and published a journal called Technological Change, which was the official publication. I've got copies of it here. In 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87 and 88. And what I used to do was write to very prominent people, businessmen, academics, politicians, people like Bob Hawke, etc., 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 and ask them to write an article on technology. And they would write articles about the use of technology.
Yes.
Bob Hawke wouldn't write about computers, he'd write about, what they could be used for. So they became very successful publications. Now they were published, supported by the Feds, by the department, and I used to edit them and put them together, etc., 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 with an assistant, and they became, I thought, very useful publication. If you have a look at, I think in my book I list the articles. Yes, I do.
You did. Yeah. And
if you have a look at those, and I also list a table of the contributors.
Yeah.
You see some, and in 1988, I think it was the last one, I went back and I asked the original contributors, like Bob Hawke, to write an updated version. And I've got very few refusals. They put pen to paper. Some 8 years later, the changes as they perceive them. They're very useful historical records.
Sure. Yeah.
Nothing to do with the ACS.
Right. But no, still part of the bigger picture there.
That's right. Yeah.
So, just looking at the history again, what would you say are some of the highlights of your career and your involvement with ACS and the broader industry?
Conferences. We used to run conferences in those days, and they were very valuable meetings. People presenting papers and getting together, and it was very useful. New South Wales used to run a famous one at Terrigal.
Okay, right.
And I used to go down. Well, when I was president, I'd be invited down.
Sure. I
used to go down, and it was a very well organised, valuable conference. I mean, they weren't talk fests.
Sure.
There were people promoting ideas and systems and developments, and we don't have them anymore. I mean, we're so far buried in the sand with our backside in the air. We may as well not be there.
Well, that's a nice segue. That I've been steering you away from this, but let's dive into that. So, you've been very critical of ACS in recent years.
Yes, extremely critical.
Let's explore that.
Because they've lost the plot.
Yeah.
I mean, they had management, presidents and CEOs that were a disgrace.
Yep.
And I've said that publicly, and I'm prepared to say it publicly again. They were a disgrace. And one can point to all sorts of events, like the attempt to convert it into a company that the federal court judge described in the most devastating terms.
Yeah.
Devastating. He said it was absolutely wrong. Awarded costs to the group that Roger Clark had headed up.
Yep.
About $250,000.
Yep.
And, said some very disturbing things about the then management. Ramasonadandra.
Yep.
Okay. Then we got people that followed on, some that are still there. That, they spent money going to Davos, for example.
Yep.
Thousands of dollars. Now, what influence can the Australian Computer Society have on the world economy? It's just absolute bloody nonsense.
Yeah.
And I could run through a series of events like that, where they've invested ACS funds into commercial enterprises, which have not paid off.
Yep.
Okay, lost money, but there's nothing done about that. I understand. I'm not sure of these facts, but I understand. When I was CEO, I had a staff of 8.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I'm led to believe, and you don't have to comment on this,
Sure.
I'm led to believe that the current staffing is about 230. Now, if that is true, and I'll accept it at the moment by my research, that is an absolute disgrace. An absolute disgrace.
Yep. So how would you see ACS reclaiming that credit?
And now let me get on to the fact that if you have a look at the website, the ACS claims to have 47,000 members.
Yep.
That is a blatant lie. LIE.
Yeah.
They have, at the best count, 9,000 members. And I can produce evidence.
Sure. Numbers.
They're mainly students applying for visas.
Yeah.
They're counted as members of the society. It's a disgrace.
Yeah.
I mean, if I wasn't on TV, I'd use stronger language.
Sure. Yeah.
It's an absolute disgrace. And it's endemic of the ACS today. Endemic.
Yep. So how would you see ACS reclaiming its
recovery?
Credibility? Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It's got to be recovered by a president that's got the guts to do things and not be driven by whatever they call it these days, a Congress or a management committee. I don't know, the management committee doesn't exist, does it?
I know, the management committee does.
Doesn't
The
it?
Congress elects the management committee.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they elect.
Right.
I think the current system allows about 2 people to be eligible to be elected as president, which is a nonsense.
Yeah.
Any member of the society should be able to be elected as president. Any member.
Yeah.
And we have this stupid system of moving up to, you've got to serve so many years here, so many years there, and so many years there before you can stand.
Sure.
Before you can stand, let alone be elected.
Yeah.
I despair, with due respect, Helen, that we'll get a president who has the guts to stand up against the management committee.
Right.
It's. I mean, I spent most of my CEO in business most of my career in business as CEO, and I think I understand the role of CEO.
Yeah.
And she's the president, but in effect, she's the CEO.
Right.
Not the CEO.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even give the CEO a vote. But that's another issue. So you've got to have a number of Roger Clarks.
Yeah.
and people like that.
Mm.
And there are a few around. There are a few. They're starting to come. Bo should have been on, but he stepped down to give Roger a chance, etc., etc. I won't go into all that. But there are people like that.
Mm.
But we need a group who are prepared to stand up. The first thing I would do, I'd sack half the staff.
Right.
Then I'd sack another half.
Yeah.
And then we'd start to see what is actually being done.
Mm.
I suspect you won't get someone to do that.
Right. Yeah. And with the public side of it, putting aside the staff and the membership politics, what would you see that ACS could be doing to become more relevant to the tech community?
It's got to give itself, well, its members, not itself. It's got to become member oriented. I mean, that's if you ask me to describe in 2 words what the focus should be, member orientation.
Sure. Yep.
With all that comes from it, professional development, etc., 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 journals, you know. It's got to. We tried for many years and failed. I'll admit that. When in my day, we tried for many years to get the equivalent of the British computer side Chartered Institute.
Right. Mm.
They're recognised as chartered engineers.
Yes. Mm.
So they can say, our people, here we are.
Yep.
We can't.
Yep.
Because what does being a member, CP, whatever, of the ACS really mean?
Sure.
Do you need it? Do you need it to do the job? What does it give you as an employer?
Yeah.
How much better are they than the people who take the short courses with ABC, etc.? So we haven't won that argument.
Right.
And until we win that argument, we go find it very difficult. And as we continue to diminish the professional numbers, which are going downhill, and I can produce evidence to show that. It's just going to get worse.
Sure.
We could well be on the road to extinction.
Yeah. So
could well be.
So going back to the early 1960s, how did you foresee what ACS would look like 50, 60 years down the track?
I don't know that we did.
Right.
I don't know that we did. I mean, we were just keen to build the organisation as it was and to grow it and get the members. And the members grew every year.
Sure.
I mean, we got up, I think, in my day, we were delighted when we got to 15,000 members.
Right.
Which is twice what they've got today. You know.
Yeah.
And they were professional members.
Right.
And we built on the, you know, we did things like establishing some credibility by getting universities to submit their programs for accreditation, for example. That was very important. You know, this means that that course will enable you to become a member of the ACS.
Yeah.
Those sort of things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So you've been really good, really generous with your time on this.
That's all right.
What is there anything else you'd like to add as part of this interview? So we're really looking at this for prosperity and what you'd like to leave people with it.
Excuse me, I'm off. I'll see you.
I mean, listening.
Everyone.
Now we got off the 47,000 very quickly, didn't we?
Yeah, we can go back to that if you like.
Because you've asked me, you know, and I think if you said to me, what's the one thing that worries me, is that.
Right.
And you say, but that's only one aspect, but it's foundational. To be claiming 47,000 members when you have 9, apart from being a blatant lie, which is unprofessional, dishonest, etc., etc., it sends you a message about the organisation, about the management.
Right.
Why hasn't the management, the president or the CEO, come in and said, remove that number?
Yeah.
Why? Because they don't have the guts.
Mm.
I mean, I'm going to write to Helen
Yeah.
and say, why? Because I wrote here on the 30th of November. I'll follow this up. I say, Helen, you need to do something about this. And I gave her the evidence.
Yeah.
I think you've seen it.
Yeah. You shared it. Yeah.
The evidence.
Mm.
And what has Helen done since the 30th of November? Nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Mm.
But people will tell me she's well versed and she's one of the good guys, she's this, she's that, she's all the rest of it. Bullshit.
Right.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Until people do things, their words don't mean a thing.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It's action, not words, which count.
Yeah. That's very...
Do as I do, not do as I say.
Sure. Yeah. So on that, if shall we call it a day? Or?
If you want to,
Yep.
I can go on for all night if you like, I know, but you're not interested.
Oh, no, I'm most definitely
Well, I don't know
interested.
how useful that's been, Paul.
Yeah.
But,
I know,